Picture this. It is September 1955. The highly respected British actor Alec Guinness is standing outside a restaurant in Los Angeles. And he runs into this 24-year-old kid.
Right, a kid who is practically buzzing with energy.
Exactly, because he has just bought a brand new silver Porsche 550 Spider.
And he is incredibly proud of this machine. I mean, he's showing it off, treating it like a trophy.
But as Guinness looks at the car, he has this visceral, almost involuntary reaction to it.
Yeah, he doesn't just think it's a fast car.
Right. He looks at it and literally finds it sinister.
All right.
And he issues this dark, incredibly specific premonition. He tells the young actor, in a voice he later claimed he barely recognized as his own, he says, "Please, never get in it. If you get in that car, you'll be found dead in it by this time next week."
And the kid just laughs it off.
Yeah, he flashes that famous crooked smile and says, "Oh, shucks, don't be so mean."
But exactly 7 days later, that 24-year-old actor, James Dean, dies in that exact car.
Welcome to today's deep dive. Looking at this massive stack of biographies, film critiques, and, historical articles we've gathered today, our mission is to look past the iconic dorm room posters.
We want to look past the brooding stare and the red jacket to find the real James Dean.
Exactly. I mean, how does a kid from an Indiana farm with only 3 major film credits to his name basically invent the modern concept of teenage angst? How does he become this immortal symbol of youthful rebellion?
It is an astonishing trajectory to chart. When you actually break down the timeline in these sources, you realize his active Hollywood film career lasted, well, essentially a year and a half.
It's staggering to think about. You are looking at a career that brief, yet it completely altered American pop culture. But to understand how he did that, we can't really start in Hollywood.
No, definitely not.
Because before Dean could project an entire generation's anxiety onto the screen, he had to live through his own.
And that takes us back to his childhood. The intense vulnerability we associate with James Dean wasn't some calculated character choice. It was deeply rooted in his early trauma.
Right.
So he was born in Indiana in 1931, but his family moved to California when he was quite young. And he was profoundly close to his mother. In fact, one biographer noted she was perhaps the only person capable of truly understanding him.
But then when he is just 9 years old, she dies of uterine cancer.
It shatters his world, and his father, Winton, feels completely unable to care for a grieving 9-year-old.
Wow.
So he puts his son on a train and sends him back to Indiana to live with his aunt and uncle on a Quaker farm.
That physical separation must have created a massive emotional rift. I mean, Dean later described his relationship with his father as an uncommunicative antagonism.
Which is such a heartbreaking phrase.
It really is. And you can see how he channeled that alienation into everything he did. On the farm, he becomes this massive overachiever. He played varsity basketball, which is wild considering he was only 5'8".
Right.
He studied drama, played baseball, and he fiercely competed in public speaking. It's like he was desperate to be seen.
He was desperately searching for an outlet, and also for a father figure, which brings us to a very complex person in his early foundation, a local Methodist pastor named Reverend James DeWeerd.
Okay, yeah.
This pastor took Dean under his wing and introduced him to adrenaline-fueled pursuits like bullfighting and car racing, along with philosophy.
Wait, looking through these biographies, there is a massive divergence of opinion on this pastor, right? Some historians frame him as a vital worldly mentor, but others suggest something much darker.
Yeah, it is a fiercely debated topic in the source material. Biographers like Joe Hyams and Paul Alexander have alleged that this relationship was intimate or even abusive. They claim it established a pattern of complex, fraught relationships with older men in Dean's life.
Right, but others have aggressively pushed back on that.
Exactly. The New York Times, for instance, dismissed some of those abuse claims as highly speculative nonsense. Now, as a reminder to you listening, we're not taking a side here, just reporting what the biographers and critics have debated.
Absolutely. But there is that claim from Elizabeth Taylor, right?
Yes.
Years later, she allegedly said Dean confided in her about being sexually abused by a minister shortly after his mother's death. Whether it was DeWeerd or someone else, it paints a picture of a childhood fraught with betrayal.
It does.
It makes you realize that his famous daddy issues on screen were incredibly authentic. He wasn't just acting out angst, he was exporting his own unresolved raw trauma directly into the camera lens.
And that raw emotional engine is exactly what drove him back to California after high school. He briefly tried to reconcile with his father and enrolled at UCLA, but he was just too restless. The path was, well, it was messy.
Messy is putting it lightly. He pledges the Sigma Nu fraternity at UCLA and promptly gets expelled for punching a fraternity brother.
Right.
He simply could not fit into that rigid collegiate mold.
So he drops out to pursue acting. The early grind was very typical for LA. He parked cars at CBS studios. He did a Pepsi commercial in 1950.
Oh, wow, a Pepsi commercial.
Yeah, and his first speaking role was playing John the Apostle in an Easter television special.
Which is pretty far removed from the leather jacket rebel we know.
Very much so.
But the major turning point happens when he moves to New York City. This is where he falls in with a crowd they called the Night Watch.
Ah, yes.
It was this group of insomniacs, misfits, and struggling artists hanging out in late-night coffee shops. And more importantly, he gets accepted into the legendary actor's studio to study under Lee Strasberg.
To understand the stakes here, you really have to understand what acting looked like in the early 1950s. Traditional Hollywood acting was very polished.
Like Cary Grant.
Exactly. Actors stood on their exact marks, they delivered lines with crisp transatlantic accents, and they projected to the back of the room like they were doing theater. Strasberg's method acting completely rejected that. It was about breaking an actor's psychology down to find absolute emotional truth.
And getting into the actor's studio was the holy grail. Dean wrote home to his family calling it the greatest school of the theater. I mean, he was rubbing shoulders with Marlon Brando and Julie Harris.
But he only ever did one solo presentation there.
Wait, really? Just one?
Just one. Dean gets up and performs a scene adapted from a novel about bullfighting, and Strasberg, who was known for being brutally critical to break his students down, completely tears the performance apart.
Oh, no.
He sharply criticizes it in front of everyone.
Which leads to this incredible moment.
Yeah.
Dean just storms out. He continues to sit in on classes, but he never submits another piece of work for Strasberg to critique again.
Never again.
I have to ask, based on the sources, was this just pure, unadulterated arrogance to walk away from the most powerful acting teacher in the world? Or was he just fiercely protective of his own instincts?
The consensus from the sources definitely points to him being protective. Dean's instincts were so raw and so deeply tied to his own emotional survival and childhood trauma that letting a domineering figure like Strasberg dissect them was likely terrifying.
That makes total sense.
Walking out was practically career suicide at the time, but Dean couldn't afford to have his internal emotional well dismantled.
And guarding those instincts paid off, because out in Hollywood, the legendary director Elia Kazan is casting a film adaptation of John Steinbeck's novel East of Eden.
Right.
Kazan needs someone very specific to play the deeply troubled son, Cal Trask. He explicitly tells his team he wants a Brando type.
So Kazan sets up a meeting between Dean and John Steinbeck himself. What's fascinating is that Steinbeck reportedly disliked Dean on a personal level.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he found him arrogant and difficult, but Steinbeck immediately admitted that Dean was absolutely perfect for the deeply troubled character of Cal.
So this kicks off the era of the only 3 major films of Dean's life. East of Eden comes first, and this is where we really see how his rejection of traditional acting changed cinema forever.
Absolutely.
There is a famous scene where Cal tries to give his father a gift of $5,000 to help him out. The father, played by the very traditional, classically trained actor Raymond Massey, rejects the money.
Now, if you read the script for that scene, Cal was supposed to turn and run away in shame after the rejection.
But Dean doesn't do that. Can you explain what he did instead and why it mattered so much?
Well, instead of running, Dean improvised. He lunged forward, weeping, and wrapped Raymond Massey in this desperate, suffocating hug.
Wow.
Because Massey was a rigidly traditional actor, he was genuinely horrified and shocked that his scene partner was breaking the script and physically grabbing him.
You can actually see it on his face.
You really can. You can see Massey's actual unscripted discomfort on screen. Kazan loved that genuine friction so much that he kept the take in the final film.
That is incredible. It's like 2 different eras of acting colliding in one hug.
Exactly. The French filmmaker and critic François Truffaut later famously said that Dean killed psychology on set.
I love that quote.
His acting flew in the face of 50 years of cinematic tradition. Truffaut described Dean's performance as being more animal than human. You never knew if he was going to turn his back to the camera, mumble his lines, laugh when he should cry, or just throw his arms up.
Which made him infinitely more relatable to a teenager in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And think about the post-war culture. Families are moving to the suburbs, everything is cookie cutter, and teenagers are basically expected to be miniature adults.
Right, put on a suit, get a job, don't complain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then Dean comes along in East of Eden, slouching and mumbling, and suddenly all that repressed teenage anxiety has a face.
He provided the physical template for a generation that felt alienated during an economic boom, which perfectly sets up his next film, Rebel Without a Cause. He plays Jim Stark, the quintessential misunderstood teen.
This is the film that completely solidifies the myth. It even changed how teenagers shopped.
Yes, the product placement.
Right, there's a scene where Dean's character uses an ace comb, and suddenly ace combs are flying off store shelves across the country. But we really have to talk about the red jacket. It might be the most famous piece of clothing in film history.
It absolutely became a uniform for youth in revolt. But what's fascinating in the source material is that the origin of that jacket is a complete myth-making machine. Everyone wanted credit for it.
Right. The actor Frank Mazzola claimed they just bought a cheap jacket at a local menswear store called Matson's and dyed it red.
But the costume designer, Moss Mabry, vehemently swore he designed and built it from scratch out of red nylon after seeing a random guy auditioning in something similar.
The fact that people fought over who created it just shows how powerful that single piece of wardrobe became.
Definitely. But as powerful as that teen rebel image was, Dean was terrified of being typecast. He didn't want to be trapped playing angry high schoolers. So for his third and final film, Giant, he took a massive risk.
He signed on to play Jet Rink, right? An older, wealthy Texas oil tycoon, acting alongside heavyweights like Elizabeth Taylor and Rock Hudson.
He went all in to prove he was a serious character actor. He shaved his hairline back to look balding. He dyed his hair gray. And he was so dedicated to the method that it actually caused problems on set.
Oh, the banquet scene.
Yeah. There's a scene near the end of the film where his character is supposed to give a drunken speech at a lavish banquet. Dean's commitment to finding the emotional truth went a bit too far there.
What did he do?
To make the scene authentic, he actually got heavily inebriated before the cameras rolled. He was so drunk that his lines were slurred and completely unintelligible.
Oh my God.
The director, George Stevens, was furious. They had to bring in another actor, Nick Adams, to overdub Dean's dialogue in post-production.
Wow. Now, you mentioned George Stevens being furious. Stevens was a very controlling director, and he demanded order. He couldn't control Dean's acting choices, but there was one thing he could control.
The race?
Right. He knew Dean loved racing cars, so Stevens explicitly banned Dean from participating in any auto races while they were filming Giant.
And Dean, surprisingly, honored that contract. But the literal second that principal photography wrapped on Giant, Dean went straight back to the track.
He didn't waste any time.
None. He traded in the Porsche Speedster he had been driving and winning races with in Palm Springs, by the way, and bought a brand new, much more powerful machine. A Porsche 550 Spider.
He gave it a very fitting nickname, too. He called it Little Bastard. Which brings us to the personal life he was leading off camera leading up to this moment. Because just as his acting was entirely fluid and unpredictable, his life completely defied the rigid, cookie-cutter conventions of the 1950s.
The studio PR machine was desperate to package him as a normal leading man. They were putting out press releases grouping him with Rock Hudson, trying to sell them as Hollywood's eligible bachelors.
But Dean refused to play that game.
His most famous public romance was with the Italian actress Pier Angeli. They had these secret beach dates, but her mother absolutely despised him. She hated his casual clothes, she hated his non-Catholic background, she hated everything he represented.
And the pressure from her family was immense. While Dean was briefly out of town, Angeli abruptly announced her engagement to the singer Vic Damone and married him shortly after.
The legend goes that during the wedding, Dean sat on his motorcycle right outside the church, revving his engine loudly to disrupt the ceremony.
I love that story. Now, a close friend and biographer, William Bast, claimed Gene actually just hired a stand-in to do the revving for the dramatic publicity effect.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But either way, it was pure cinematic defiance.
That blend of authentic pain and calculated PR was quintessential James Dean. And this defiance extended to his sexuality, which the sources highlight as being highly fluid.
When a reporter directly asked him if he was gay, Dean famously gave this incredible answer. He said, "No, I am not a homosexual. But I'm also not going to go through life with one hand tied behind my back."
It was a remarkably bold thing to say in the incredibly conservative 1950s. The debate among his peers was endless. Friends like Martin Landau insisted Dean was heavily focused on women.
But others disagreed.
Right. Elizabeth Taylor later said he swung both ways and simply hadn't made up his mind yet. Nicholas Ray, who directed him in Rebel Without a Cause, plainly stated Dean was bisexual and couldn't understand why people tried to make a mystery out of it.
I have to wonder if this ambiguity was his secret weapon. I mean, he wasn't your standard imposing macho leading man like John Wayne. He projected this sensitivity, vulnerability, and a kind of androgyny. Do you think that made him a magnet for audiences?
Oh, without a doubt. The critic David Thompson pointed out that Dean's intelligence and sexual ambiguity made him universal. He was a mirror. Teenagers, regardless of their background or gender, saw their own confusion, their own unspoken desires, and their own vulnerability reflected in him.
He didn't offer the rigid certainty of the adult world,
Exactly. He offered a shared sense of doubt.
but the one place he did seek total certainty, total control, was behind the wheel of a car. Which brings us back to September 1955 and the Porsche 550 Spider.
He is planning to enter a road race in Salinas, California. His mechanic, Rolf Fuderich, suggests that instead of towing the Porsche, they should drive it up the coast from Los Angeles to properly break the engine in.
Let's trace the timeline of Friday, September 30th. At 3:30 p.m., Dean gets pulled over by the highway patrol and gets a speeding ticket.
But he doesn't slow down.
No. Just a couple hours later, at about 5:45 p.m., he's driving west on Highway 466 near Cholom, California.
Coming from the opposite direction is a 23-year-old college student named Donald Turnipseed driving a heavy Ford coupe. Turnipseed attempts to make a routine left turn onto Highway 41.
And in doing so, he crosses directly into the path of the oncoming low-to-the-ground Porsche.
It happens in the blink of an eye. Dean couldn't stop in time. He hits the passenger side of the Ford. The mechanic is thrown from the car and survives his injuries, but Dean is trapped inside the crumpled Spider.
He died almost instantly of a broken neck and was officially pronounced dead at 6:20 p.m.
What is truly haunting about this when you step back and look at his life is the absolute mundanity of the event.
Yeah.
Here is a guy who fought authority, who practiced bullfighting, who rebelled against the entire Hollywood studio system, and he isn't taken out in a fiery crash on a professional racetrack pushing the limits of human speed. It was a simple, everyday failure to yield at a highway junction by a college kid.
Yet that split-second mundane error instantly elevated James Dean to a mythological status that almost no one else has ever achieved.
The film industry recognized the earthquake immediately. He became the first actor in history to ever receive a posthumous Academy Award nomination for Best Actor for his role in East of Eden.
And then, the following year, he received a second posthumous nomination for Giant.
To this day, he's the only actor to hold that record.
The crash ended a 24-year-old's life, but it birthed an archetype that reshaped modern pop culture. Let's look at fashion. Before James Dean, denim jeans were literal rural work clothes. You wore them to farm or work in a factory.
And a white t-shirt. That was considered underwear. You didn't wear it out in public.
Exactly. The philosopher Malcolm Barnard wrote about how jeans transitioned from simple workwear to garments that revealed the form of the body. Dean, wandering on screen in his jeans, his fitted white t-shirt and his jacket, took what adults considered sloppy and turned it into a highly fashionable uniform of resistance.
And his impact on music was arguably even bigger, which is crazy to think about because he wasn't a musician.
Right. He didn't sing or play instruments on screen.
But rock and roll basically adopted him as its patron saint. Elvis Presley actively studied him. Elvis explicitly admitted, "I've made a study of poor Jimmy Dean. I know why girls go for us. We're sullen, we're brooding, we're something of a menace."
That's fascinating.
Elvis recognized that Dean had proven a new rule for pop culture. You couldn't be truly sexy if you smiled. You couldn't be a genuine rebel if you grinned.
And Bob Dylan. A young Bob Dylan consciously mimicked Dean's visual style on his early album covers. One of the biographers we looked at described Dylan's early image as, quite simply, James Dean with a guitar.
Dean was the harbinger of youth identity politics.
I propose that James Dean was basically patient zero for modern teenage culture. Before him, teenagers didn't really exist as a cultural force.
They were just kids waiting to be adults.
Right. After Dean, they were a distinctly separate demographic. They had their own attitudes, their own deep anxieties, and thanks to him, their own uniform.
He provided the physical form for the feeling of being alienated.
So to bring it all together for you listening, a kid from an Indiana farm, dealing with the profound grief of losing his mother and total alienation from his father, managed to articulate the unsaid, inarticulate desires of an entire generation. And he did it all within just 3 movies.
It leaves us with a fascinating, if somewhat cynical, observation made by Humphrey Bogart shortly after Dean's death.
What did he say?
Bogart said, "Dean died at just the right time. He left behind a legend. If he had lived, he'd never have been able to live up to his publicity."
Which is a heavy thought to end on, but I want you to mull this over. Is James Dean's legacy so perfectly enduring exactly because he died before he could grow old? He never had to make a bad movie. He never had the chance to compromise his ideals, sell out, or do a cheesy sitcom cameo. He remains forever 24, forever vulnerable, and forever the ultimate rebel. Sitting in that silver Porsche, laughing off Alec Guinness's dark premonition, suspended in time right before the world changed forever.